You know what fascinates me most, Andrew? Um, the way Prophet Sulaiman's story ends, like for all his power, his armies, his control over jinn and animals, his death shows just how fragile humans are. The story goes that when he died, he was leaning on his staff, overseeing the jinn working, but nobody realized he had passed away. He stayed like that, standing for a long time. The jinn thought he was still alive, so they kept working in obedience. Only when his staff was eaten away by termites and his body collapsed did they realize he was gone. That's humbling, man. The mightiest king brought down by termites. Andrew Tate, that's deep, Joe. Because it proves no matter how powerful you are, death humbles everyone. You can control armies, you can command jinn, you can move thrones across continents, but you can't escape death. That's God's way of reminding us that we're never bigger than the reality of our mortality. Even a king like Suleiman had to face it, and it exposed something else. The jinn weren't all-knowing. They thought he was alive. They can be powerful, but they don't know the unseen. Only God does. That kills the whole myth that jinn are all-knowing or unstoppable. Joe Rogan, yeah, man. And it's a huge lesson for leadership. Because think about it, Suleiman's entire reign was about justice, wisdom, humility, and when he died, he didn't die in some golden palace surrounded by luxury. He died standing, still working, still overseeing, still fulfilling his role. That's dedication. That's the opposite of today's leaders who retire into luxury or cling to power until they're carried out. Andrew Tate, it also proves that true kings don't need statues or monuments. His legacy is in the stories, the wisdom, the impact. That's why we're still talking about him thousands of years later. Compare that to leaders today. Most of them will be forgotten in a generation. Why? Because they're chasing ego, not legacy. Joe Rogan. And I think one of the most mind-blowing things is the way he interacted with animals. Like the Quran says he had an army of birds. Birds, man. Imagine looking up and seeing formations of birds flying in unison at your command, like living drones. And there's this story about the hoopoe bird. It went missing from his ranks. And Suleiman noticed when the bird came back, it reported about the Queen of Sheba's kingdom and her people worshiping the sun instead of God. That bird basically acted like an intelligence agent. And Suleiman used that information strategically. That's next level governance. Andrew Tate, that shows awareness, Joe. Imagine a king with armies of humans and jinn, but he still notices when one little bird is missing. That's leadership. Today's CEOs don't even know the names of their employees. Suleiman knew every soldier, every bird, every detail of his kingdom. That's why he was respected, not just feared. Joe Rogan, and it wasn't about arrogance either. When he saw his power, he didn't say, "Look what I did." He kept saying, "This is by the grace of God." Like when he saw the throne of the Queen of Sheba brought before him in an instant, he didn't flex. He said, "This is a test from my Lord." That's the opposite of how people behave today. Andrew Tate, that's why he's the example of what I call real masculinity. It's not just about strength, dominance, or control. It's about discipline, humility, wisdom, and submission to God. Suleiman could have been the most arrogant man in history, but instead he was grateful. That's why God gave him so much. And today, men think being masculine is just lifting weights or buying cars. No, masculinity is ruling yourself first, and Suleiman mastered that. Joe Rogan, that ties into something I've been thinking about, and technology, AI, all this futuristic stuff. It's basically humanity trying to control more, control over nature, over time, over other people. But Suleiman had all that and more. And what did he do? He used it responsibly. If you gave today's leaders control over jinn or animals, they'd probably destroy the world. But Suleiman didn't. That's the difference between wisdom-driven leadership and ego-driven leadership. Andrew Tate, exactly. Look at social media today. People get a little influence, and they misuse it. They spread chaos, negativity, lies. Imagine giving those same people the ability to control jinn, disaster. That's why God chose Suleiman, because he could handle it. God doesn't give power to people who can't carry the weight. And that's the ultimate lesson. If you want power, you need discipline first. Joe Rogan, and it's crazy how his stories resonate even in the modern world. Like think about leadership strategies. psychological tactics, information networks, even energy control. This guy had all of it, but he also had faith. That balance is rare. Most powerful people either lose faith because they think they're gods, or they have faith but no power. Sulaiman had both. That's rare. Andrew Tate, that's why he's remembered as more than just a king. He was a prophet. And that's what I keep saying, Joe. Men today need prophets, not celebrities. They need examples of discipline, wisdom, and faith. Look at the world. It's chaos, depression, anxiety, lost direction. You put Sulaiman in today's world, and he'd instantly rise above, because people crave leadership. They want someone who doesn't just flex, but actually guides. Joe Rogan, yeah, man. And I think the lesson from Sulaiman's story is that greatness doesn't come from chasing wealth, women, or power. It comes from chasing wisdom and submitting to something higher. And when you do that, you're trusted with power. That's why billions of people still talk about him today. Andrew Tate. Exactly. He's proof that the highest level of power is the power to rule yourself. That's why he could rule jinn, animals, armies, and nations, because he first ruled his own ego. And that's the real blueprint for men today. Joe Rogan, and honestly, Andrew, it's inspiring. It shows us that even in a world obsessed with status and ego, there's another path. A path where humility, wisdom, and gratitude lead to real power. That's timeless. You know, Andrew, when we talk about history, legends, and powerful rulers, most people think of Caesar, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, guys like that. But when you dive into Islamic tradition, there's a name that absolutely blows all of them out of the water. Prophet Sulaiman, or Solomon, as some traditions call him. And dude, his story isn't just about being some king with riches. This guy literally had command over nature, over animals, and even over beings that we don't fully understand, jinn. Like, we're talking supernatural dominion here. That's insane. Andrew Tate, Joe, that's what separates real kingship from the fake stuff we see today. People look at billionaires, rappers, or politicians and think that's power, but it's shallow. They're controlled by corporations, by governments, by public opinion. Sulaiman, on the other hand, was a man who didn't just rule humans, he ruled realms. He could summon armies of birds, lions, and even jinn. He could control the winds, transport himself across lands instantly. And the best part, he wasn't some tyrant abusing his powers. He had discipline, humility, and wisdom. Joe Rogan, yeah, man, it's wild because the Quran really paints this picture of him as a guy who asked for wisdom above everything else. He could have asked for gold, palaces, women, all of that. But he asked God for wisdom to rule justly, and because of that, God gave him wisdom, and on top of it, gave him everything else: wealth, power, dominion, armies, supernatural control. It's like the ultimate life lesson. If you chase wisdom, everything else falls into place. Andrew Tate, that's the real secret, Joe. People today are chasing money, fame, validation. They're slaves to their own desires. But a man like Sulaiman proves that if you chase something higher, discipline, wisdom, connection with God, you'll be given everything else anyway. It's like focusing on the root instead of the fruit. Joe Rogan, and dude, the stories about him are insane. Like, there's this famous one where his army is marching and they pass through a valley of ants. One ant tells the others, "Quick, get inside your homes so you don't get crushed by Sulaiman's army." And Sulaiman actually hears this. He smiles, he laughs, and he thanks God for giving him the ability to understand even the speech of an ant. Now think about that. This guy commands jinn, controls winds, has armies of men and animals, and he's humbled by an ant. That's perspective, man. Andrew Tate, that's true greatness. That's why Islam calls him a prophet, not just a king. Because his role wasn't just to dominate, but to guide with justice. And his humility shows it. Imagine today's leaders laughing at the wisdom of an ant and thanking God for it. It wouldn't happen. They'd ignore it, step on it, and move on. But Sulaiman recognized that even an ant has a voice, a perspective, a right to exist. That's real awareness. Joe Rogan, it also makes you think about intelligence. We've got AI today, right? computers that process languages, analyze data, translate speech. But here's a man thousands of years ago who had divine wisdom to understand creatures across species. That's like the original universal translator. And not just languages, he had insight into psychology, like the story of the two women fighting over the baby. You've heard that one, right, Andrew Tate? Of course. Two women came to him, each claiming the baby was hers. He listens to them, then says, "Bring me a sword, I'll cut the child in half so both of you can share." Immediately, one woman cries, "No, give him to her, just don't hurt the child." That reaction revealed the true mother. Sulaiman wasn't just being clever, he was using emotional intelligence, strategy, and wisdom. He knew the truth comes out when you apply pressure. That's a lesson for all leaders. Joe Rogan, yeah man, that's like high-level psychology before psychology even existed. And then you add in the part about the jinn. I mean, in Islamic belief, jinn are not myths. They're real beings made from smokeless fire. They live parallel to us, some good, some bad, and Sulaiman had authority over them. That's like ruling over a dimension that we can't even see. Dude, that's some Marvel-level stuff, but for Muslims, it's scripture. Andrew Tate, and think about how dangerous jinn are. They can influence people, whisper evil, travel fast, Imagine trying to rule humans and then also having to control beings like that. That takes a completely different level of leadership. And yet, Sulaiman had them working for him, building palaces, diving into the oceans, mining treasures. They obeyed him. That's real dominance, Joe. Joe Rogan, and he didn't use that power for petty stuff. He wasn't like, "Hey, jinn, bring me wine or entertain me." He used them for construction, for governance, for building his kingdom. It's like having the world's greatest engineers, miners, soldiers, and spies at your disposal. But he kept it in service of his people and in obedience to God. Andrew Tate, that's the lesson. A real man uses power responsibly. He's not enslaved by it. He disciplines it. Today's world is the opposite. Give someone a little money, a little fame, and they spiral out of control. Sulaiman had cosmic power, and he stayed grounded. That's why his name still inspires respect thousands of years later. Joe Rogan, there's also the Queen of Sheba story. She hears about this king who supposedly rules the jinn and animals, who has supernatural powers. She doesn't believe it, so she goes to test him. But before she even arrives, Sulaiman tells one of the jinn to bring her throne to him, and it happens instantly, like teleportation. That's nuts. She walks in and sees her throne already there, and that shocks her. It's like undeniable proof of his authority. Andrew Tate, that's a perfect example of God showing who holds the real power. Even a queen with armies, wealth, and palaces realized she was standing before someone whose strength didn't come from worldly things, but from God. And the Quran says she eventually submitted to God after seeing Sulaiman's wisdom and power. That's leadership, Joe. Not forcing submission by sword, but by truth and awe. Joe Rogan, exactly, and it makes me think about how small our ambitions are today. People are obsessed with becoming influencers, getting a paycheck, showing off cars. Meanwhile, Sulaiman's mission was cosmic justice, wisdom, dominion across species and realms. His vision wasn't about ego, it was about serving a higher purpose. That's the difference between a king and a man pretending to be one.